Coming to you from the iconic Studio A at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, it's time for the Gardening Simplified podcast, YouTube, and radio show with Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. Well, in the U.S., trends and statistics show people are moving to Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Georgia. For domestic migration, the leaders are by far Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Arizona, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. And I think they're getting a lot of people from the bottom three, Illinois, New York, and California. I'm going to guess it has less to do with gardening and more to do with cost of living, winter climate, taxation, all those kinds of things. If it's about gardening and the best year-round weather, the top three states, arguably, are California, Hawaii, and Florida. Now, Stacy, for me, I really like a change of seasons, the change of pace, but it's no wonder that plant breeders more and more have focused on plants that are heat tolerant versus cold tolerant.
Well, heat tolerance is an issue. There are many climates, even in the Midwest. I always like to say, shout out to those people in Missouri, you've kind of got the worst of both worlds. You get really cold and it gets really, really hot.
Love that.
And I can't imagine gardening like that. I mean, it sounds like such a challenge. So even if you live in what would be considered like a mild or cool climate, you could definitely still need plants that can easily tolerate, periods of 100-degree temperatures or more for several days. That's not uncommon nowadays.
Yeah, great point. Well, we have our issues in the Midwest, like snowstorm winters, road salt, and we have corn sweat in summer. A lot of people have never heard of corn sweat before, but when the corn is actively growing and it's transpiring out in the fields, they say it really pumps out the humidity in the Midwest and you can feel it. Corn sweat.
I've been hearing about that quite a bit lately.
Yes.
Although it does not seem to be affecting us as of late. The temperatures have plunged.
They have
As
plunged.
has the humidity.
It feels fall-like all of a sudden here in Michigan. But as Alan Armitage told us a few weeks ago, he said it's easier to garden in the north than in the south. His opinion. So I thought I'd give us a quick limerick to start us off today. And my limerick is Ballad of a Northern Transplant. I faced northern winters with acridity, sold my house, now I've got liquidity. I learned through word of mouth, to garden you gotta go south and put up with the heat and humidity. I long for a cool, gentle breeze. I'm surrounded by drooping leaves. My plants aren't the only thing wilting. Like me, they are slightly tilting. It feels like a bajillion degrees. And I put together that limerick for our guest on today's show, Brie Arthur. She's joining us today on the show. She's a best-selling author and gardening personality. Brie is widely known for her leadership with the National Foodscape Movement, and she has lively and informative packed presentations. I've attended a number of them. And with more than 2 decades of professional horticultural experience, she's a longtime contributor on the Emmy Award-winning PBS television show, Growing a Greener World. So if you want to follow Brie, as I do, BrieGrows.com or her social media and YouTube channel, Brie the Plant Lady. Brie, thanks for joining us on the Gardening Simplified show and helping us with this conundrum of comparing northern garden with gardening in the south.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always such a treat, and I was having to really not laugh out loud during your limerick, but it's pretty accurate.
Well, yes, and I stole that phrase from you, Brie, because I do follow you on YouTube, and many times you'll be standing out there demonstrating something, and you'll say something like, it's a bajillion degrees out here, and I believe you.
We've had a few days where I thought my skin was going to melt off my body.
Amazing. Well, we want to get a little help from you today, and we'll be interviewing you in our fourth segment about this comparison between gardening in the north and south. Stacy, we get comments and mail from people on this topic.
Oh, yeah, a lot, because because of exactly what you described. A lot of people are moving. They get a new home. They're excited to landscape it. And then they find out, oh my gosh, I can't grow my beloved lilacs. I can't grow my beloved peonies. And they feel a bit unmoored. I mean, I've said it on the show before, but I cannot tell you how many gardeners I've heard from who moved to a hot climate and were just like, what do you mean I can't grow lilacs? Like, what is even going on here? Now, to me, it is definitely a question of the grass is always greener on the other side, because I can enumerate a number of plants that I would love to grow if I lived in a warmer climate. To me, that would be a very exciting opportunity, and I don't think I would miss lilacs one bit. But it's very hard for people to leave behind what's familiar and learn to face these challenges, not just in plant selection, but also in, dealing with humidity, dealing with drought, dealing with prolonged periods of high temperatures, and especially high nighttime temperatures.
So, Brie, you recently gave a talk at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum at North Carolina State, which I believe is just up the road from you. What I've learned as a southern transplant. Are we on the right track here?
You are 100% hitting it. And, I've been here 22 years. I did move here for climate. I decided early on I didn't want to have to do snow removal as part of my career path. And we have such an influx of Northerners moving here. And it's really important to have events like what the Ralston just held to try and educate the people so that they don't feel this crushing disappointment when everything that they do fails and it's what they used to do successfully in other climates. It really is like moving to a different planet when you come to the South.
Wow, it's that shocking to the system. Well, I noticed based on the description of your talk, you said my program covers a lot, focusing on the importance of soil, seasons, which are dramatically different there, plant selections, including annuals and perennials. When I follow you, Brie, to try to learn some things, I see you walk up to a bed saying, well, I want to retrofit this bed and dig up the plants and change things for next year, but I'm going to wait until the weather gets cooler in December. You want to know what I'm doing in December, Brie? I'm shoveling snow.
It's so accurate. And that's probably the absolute hardest habit to break. And I've recently gone through this with my parents who, retired from Michigan and relocated to Aiken, South Carolina, and 5 years in, and they still can't break some of their northern habits.
That's fantastic. Are the plant varieties that you grow in North Carolina, Brie, all that much different from what we grow in Michigan?
It's not that they're that different. It's their performance might be very different, or the plants here might not get as large. I mean, hostas are a great example. We don't have enough cold chill hours. They don't have proper dormancy in the winter, so they don't get to be the size of shrubs in North Carolina.
Wow.
In fact, you have them a few years and they sort of dwindle away, in part because of deer and foals and rabbits, but also just because the ground doesn't freeze. And plants like hostas and peonies, they appreciate that cold dormant period that you get in the north.
That's really interesting, Brie. On a show a couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. Alan Armitage on the show, and he, of course, is from Quebec, Canada, studied at Michigan State University, but he said gardening is much easier in the north than the south because up north, the plants are either beautiful or dead, one or the other, whereas in the south, they kind of linger or hang on like your hostas.
We have this, hope springs eternal. You never quite know. I fully agree with Alan. Having lived in both climates, there's also a lot to be said for having that rest period in the winter where you aren't actively transplanting things and working in your garden on a regular basis. Here, it's a 12-month cycle. In fact, I've actually gone so far as to recommend to a lot of people that they take June, July, and August off from gardening, and they really only garden from September to May because the summers are becoming less and less enjoyable.
Yeah. Now that makes a lot of sense. Coming up in our fourth segment, stick around. Brie is going to give us advice on gardening in the South, especially if you're a transplant from a northern region. This is going to be great. And we're looking forward to that in segment 4. Coming up next, we'll hear from Stacy in Plants on Trial, how she's going to tie it in this week. I can't wait. That's coming up next here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where the order of the day is the grass is always greener on the other side. You know, people often do think, oh, if only I could grow this, I would be happy. And I feel that. You know, the other day, my husband said to me, if you could grow an avocado tree, would you? I was like, 2.
Yeah.
I couldn't. You can't give me enough avocados. Because if I could grow an avocado tree, I could grow lemons and oranges and limes and all of these great things. But of course, all the people who can grow those things are probably sitting around going, oh, I really wish I could grow blah, blah, blah. So wherever you're at, know there is always someone who's wishing they could grow what you take for granted, if that's any comfort whatsoever.
Well said. Well said.
I know for me, I don't know if I'd want to garden in a humid climate, but definitely like an arid Californian, Mediterranean climate. I think I would be very, very happy. And
I love humidity, but I'm strange. Forgive me, I'm only humid. So.
Well, you have short hair, so you don't have to worry about getting big hair from the humidity and all that. But, obviously we're talking about temperature and gardening in hot climates versus cold climates. And I wanted today's plant on trial to be a plant that is from a warm climate or is commonly grown in warm climates, but can actually be grown in cool climates as well. And I think that with the advent of the internet, obviously that's been a while now, but that it has really changed the way that people think about a lot of plants because, for many, many years, garden centers weren't really going out on a limb and saying like, oh, hey, this is a cool plant. Maybe it will survive for you. But now there's all of these discussion groups and Facebook groups and all of that where people are sharing their experience and they're starting to learn that things can be grown that maybe for many, many years, it was just assumed that things weren't as hardy. And one great example of that is Crapemyrtle.
What a great choice. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this because you've shown me Crapemyrtle in the garden here, and it is stunning.
It is stunning. And, I was thinking that a lot of people from the north, when they travel to the south, they see Crapemyrtles, but they don't really understand what's so special about them because they're not usually in the south in the summer. And that is when Crapemyrtles excel. And if you're not familiar with them, they are honestly one of the most floriferous flowering shrubs or trees, and most of them are trees, but there are shrubby varieties, and today's plant on trial is a shrubby Crapemyrtle. But they are they'll take your breath away. They are just positively covered in thousands and thousands of super vivid flowers. And you can't not notice them. They're they take all the attention. And they also have really nice bark. Mm-hmm. So that's another great feature. That's what most people will notice about them if they are traveling, south in the winters. Beautiful, smooth bark. But, overall, their foliage is just kind of there. They do have good fall color overall, but their foliage is just not really their strong suit. So there has long been this desire to have Crapemyrtles that have more interesting foliage. Mm-hmm. And that's where the Center Stage series of Crapemyrtle come in. They have black foliage. So, really not kind of purpley. It's really quite a true black. And there are 3 different colors of the Center Stage Crapemyrtles, each one with black foliage. So there's Center Stage Red, which we've already covered on the show. There's Center Stage Coral, which is kind of like a light, slightly orangey pink. And then Center Stage Pink, which is today's plant on trial, which has vivid, bright fuchsia flowers that just absolutely pop against that dark black foliage.
Yeah, the flowers look fluorescent to me. And whenever I fly south and get off the airplane and you go hail a cab, usually that drive out of the airport is usually lined with Crapemyrtle.
Yes, that says so much about how crepe myrtles are so easy to grow. They're so durable because they are extensively used as street trees. You can go down to New Orleans and they line the avenues and the parks down there, absolutely on airports. And they're super popular as a home, landscape plant as well, because they're very easy to grow. They are very durable, as is common in the South. There are some pests that specifically prey on crepe myrtle, some bark scales, just because you don't have that killing frost that we tend to get up here. But still, they shoulder that burden without problem. And every single year, they just bloom like crazy.
Well, I'm anxious here. I'm going to jump ahead then, Stacy, because I'm sold on center stage pink crepe myrtle. Tell me the USDA hardiness zone, please.
Right. So most crepe myrtles for many, many years were thought only to grow down to USDA zone 7.
Okay.
But they actually, most of them will easily grow in USDA zone 6. Some, not center stage specifically, even down to USDA zone 5. And so we're really starting to find out that they are much more cold tolerant. Now, in these colder areas, most of these crepe myrtles are going to die back to the ground, especially if you've had a hard winter. But the thing is, they're able to come right back up, despite the fact that they're woody plants. They come right back up from their roots and grow and flower because they flower on new wood. So having that frost die back over winter it means you still get all of that great color. And everybody in your neighborhood is going to be like, oh my gosh, what is that? Because they don't even know that they can grow them in the first place. So we put USDA zone 6B on center stage crepe myrtle. That black foliage that makes them so unique and distinctive does mean that they are a little less hardy than other green-leafed crepe myrtles that are out there. So if you are in zone 5 or zone 6A and you want to try a crepe myrtle, center stage would not be the best one to start with. But if you're in zone 6B, as we are here in West Michigan, we have had great survival. They will go on to grow and flower even if they die back to the ground, which they actually don't do every year. And again, these are shrubby crepe myrtles. So if you're trying a crepe myrtle in a cool climate, you want to go for these shrubby types rather than the tree types, because the tree types will never be able to form that trunk and grow into that tree. But the shrubby types, they're multi-stemmed. They are the ones that are more capable of regenerating after really, really harsh weather. And center stage is definitely one of those. Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting about crepe myrtles, when you see them, all you see is the color, and you just see this big, massive flowers. But when you kind of zoom in, so to speak, and look at an individual flower, they are so unique and so intricate. You really kind of can't believe your eyes when you're actually looking at an individual flower. And these are in the Lythraceae family. So that is the loose strife family. Now, don't panic. I know most people are going to panic when they hear that, especially in the Midwest, because purple loosestrife is such a terrible invasive plant for us. But just because they're related does not mean they're a problem. Crepe myrtles very rarely set seed and grow even in hot climates where they would be perfectly at home. So you don't have to worry about this spreading. But it's actually a pretty interesting plant family. So when you look at this flower, of course, it's the flowers that group plants into families. It is related to pomegranate.
Oh,
so
nice.
Pomegranate is also in the Lythraceae, as is another invasive but very interesting plant, the water caltrop, Trepa nutans, which is an aquatic plant. It was very common in the Hudson River in New York, and they make these really cool seeds. They're kind of charcoaly black. They're really fun to play with. Also in that same family. So it's kind of a really unusual mix of plants. And when you look at the flowers of all of them, I know I was reading the Wikipedia page on the Lythraceae today, and it said the petals often appear crumpled. And that is kind of actually the case. And it's really cool to see the crepe myrtle flowers come, the way that they are arranged in the bud and the way that they open. It's just a really, really unique plant. And because this is a shrubby variety, the center stage series is, they're going to be down there where you can actually see them, because in those, large trees like that they use for street trees in the South, you don't get to engage with the flowers because they're usually pretty high up on the tree. So these shrubby ones allow you to get up close to really enjoy how unique they are. And we'll, of course, have pictures of those in the show notes at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, as well as in the YouTube version. If you are watching that, you'll see what I mean with these really, really unique flowers. Now, we did The Center Stage series was developed by Megan Matai, our breeder here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, who has been on the show before. And she spent a lot of time developing these because we needed them to be powdery mildew resistant.
Okay.
And any other black foliaged crepe myrtles that have been on the market previously were susceptible to powdery mildew. This is something that's not uncommon for black foliage plants, whether it is that they are more susceptible in and of themselves or just that the powdery mildew really stands out on that dark foliage, or a combination of both. I don't know. But it was really important that these varieties be very, very resistant to powdery mildew. So if you want to try it, they are disease resistant, but you are going to want to put them in full sun. So at least 6 hours of bright sun every day.
Full sun, are they drought resistant?
They are going to be very drought tolerant once they are established. And
Okay.
of course, it's always, you got to get them there, make sure they get that good root system down. But yeah, I mean, that's why they're able to grow as urban street trees, because they can withstand long periods of drought.
It's fascinating information, Stacy. I thought the water caltrop was an Olympic sporting event. So I wrote it down here, and I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, look it up. It's a quite interesting plant, and you will never suspect it's related to today's plant on trial, Center Stage Pink Crepe Myrtle. So we're going to take a little break right now, and when we come back, we're going to open up that garden mailbag. So please stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where it's our time to help you in the garden. And of course, as fall is coming, people have so many questions. What do I do? What don't I do? And remember, the answer is always, when in doubt, don't. Just don't. Wait until you know what to do to make a decision. It's a lot easier to correct something you didn't do usually than something that you shouldn't have done and did, if that makes any sense. But we've all been there.
Story of my life.
Yeah, not just for gardening, but especially for gardening. This is how gardening informs every aspect of life. The things you learn growing plants can make a difference in all aspects of your life. But if you do have a question, you are most welcome to reach out to us at help@gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, or just visit gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. We've got a contact form there. And you can even ask us a question on YouTube by leaving a comment, and we'll make sure that we get back to you if you have a question there. And what do we got in the mailbag today?
Well, sage advice there, Stacy, and I agree. Fall, fabulous time to be out there gardening. Karma writes, does zucchini have a short life cycle? I planted 6 zucchini. You think I'm crazy, but I have had horrible squash vine borer kill so many, so I planted a lot. To my surprise, all lived, and I supplied my neighborhood for a few weeks. Then out of nowhere, approximately second week in August, 4 of them stopped producing, turned yellow. I just took these pictures. They aren't dead. What do you think happened? I live in zone 5B.
Okay, so she goes on to say, a master gardener in Utah said we don't have squash vine borer in Utah. Yet when I've seen a little moth that has the same coloring as a squash vine borer moth, a pumpkin or zucchini wilts and dies within days. Is the squash vine borer this far west or not? So, Karma, I want you to know that I feel your pain, because, when people make those jokes about, National Sneak Zucchini onto your neighbor's porch,
Yes.
Don't leave your car unlocked or it's going to be full of zucchini. I have had a similar experience to you, where I always get squash vine borer, and I'm very jealous of all these people who have more zucchini than they can handle, because my plants, and here in Michigan, the squash vine borer hits just as they start producing. So you don't even get like a little bit before they destroy the plant. If you're not familiar with this, it is a moth larva. So the little caterpillar, they lay the eggs, it goes into the squash vine, and it actually lives in those hollow stems, and it makes its way down into the main stem of the plant and can actually completely, detach the plant from its roots. In which case, of course, it doesn't produce anymore. So good on you to not have that problem this year. I actually did have a successful zucchini harvest this year. And one of the reasons why, I think, is because I planted it much later than I usually do. So instead of planting, in May, when most people are planting zucchini, just because my garden wasn't ready and we were doing so much work in the yard, I didn't plant until about the second week of June. And so my zucchini harvest is actually just coming in now. But I think I kind of missed that prime squash borer time.
Season, yeah.
But so Karma, for your first question, yes, zucchini absolutely does have a short life cycle. It's nothing that you're doing. It's not like you can keep watering it or do something special to it to keep it growing. It fruits. It's done. That's just how it is. And if you want a continuous harvest of zucchini, the best thing you can do is to continue to sow the zucchini seeds through the season. So what you would do is go ahead and make that first sowing, in early May, and then 3 to 4 or 5 weeks later, make a second sowing of zucchini. And you can even probably do a third one 3 to 4 weeks after that, because you'll see how many days it takes from germination on your seed packet. It will usually say like 54 days, and that will be, roughly when you can harvest after germination. So you can kind of do the math based on your season. But yeah, that's just the way that zucchini is. But now I did research about squash vine borer in Utah, and it is true that it is primarily a pest in the eastern half of the U.S. and Canada. However, I did read that the squash vine borer is found in Mexico, and Utah is not like right next door to Mexico, but it's not far, and moths get around. So I don't think it's inconceivable for squash vine borer to be present in your area. But as I was researching this, I also discovered that there are relatives of squash vine borer with very delightful names. Pickleworm. You ever hear of a pickleworm?
Pickleworm. When the relatives come over, it's trouble. And this is the case.
Pickleworm is a relative of the squash vine borer. Now, it does prey primarily on cucumbers, but because cucumbers are closely related to squash, it can prey on squash. And melonworm, which again, like the pickleworm, primarily a predator of melons, but can absolutely grow on squash. And those are found out west. So it is possible that what you're seeing is a relative, or it's also possible that you do indeed have squash vine borer. It sounds like from everything you described, that's what the problem is. But from the photos that you sent, yeah, these plants are they've, outlived their usefulness, and they just go dormant, and you can use that as an opportunity to plant a fall crop, either of squash or of greens, lettuces, carrots, radishes. There's lots of different ways that you can then transform that space into a fall crop to extend your season and get you a little bit more to harvest.
And Karma says that she lives in zone 5B. I can tell you from experience that when it gets hot and humid in summer, any of the cucurbits are also going to struggle with downy mildew or powdery mildew, something to watch for too. All of these types of things, Stacy, can cause some wilt in short order.
Yes, definitely. Plants. They are very disease prone plants, I have to confess. Mm-hmm. I'm growing them right now. Both my zucchini and cucumbers have disease. I'm just living with it.
Mine does too. Joanne writes, I'm a listener to the podcast, learning so much. Thank you. Well, thank you, Joanne. And I'm writing to ask for pruning advice. I have a Winecraft black smoke bush on its leap year. First year sleeps, second year creeps, third year leaps. And it did some funky wild growing. It sent off tall branches that are bare until the top, where there is a pour of small branches and leaves. It looks ridiculous, and it's top heavy and bends down in the rain. My instinct is to cut the long branches off, but I'm not sure where.
All right. So smokebush in general, whether it's Winecraft Black or Royal Purple or one of the other many varieties that are out there, they just do weird things. It is just an inherent quality that this plant has. They have some very unusual growth. And particularly, Joanne didn't say, but particularly if these are plants that you purchased mail order and you started with a very small plant, you're going to have to do some heavy pruning on them to try to get them into shape. Now, the good news is that after they kind of go through this like awkward teenage phase, roughly in years 2 to 5, they're done. Like then they will grow normal, and you won't get this wild and crazy, I don't even know how to explain it, like pom-pom like growth.
Joanne says
fireworks.
Funky
fireworks. Yeah, they're funky. So yes, I would say go ahead and prune them. You can prune them anytime. At this point, it's September. I would probably wait until they are dormant to prune, just so that they can take in the energy and the foliage that's on the plant right now. And then you can pretty much prune it wherever you want based on what you want the plant to look like. So that might mean that you take off that funky spray of growth and prune below that. It might mean that you prune off all but one of the branches in that funky spray of growth to try to get it to do what you want it to do. Some people like to grow smoke bush as a multi-stemmed shrub. Some people like to grow it as a small tree. So it all depends on what your goals are for it. Just know that wherever if you cut off that spray of branches, it is going to branch, but those branches will then be within the plant. So whenever this happens, you can feel free to prune it. Again, at this point, let the plant take in that energy. It's just a best practices kind of thing to do. But then, go ahead and prune it. We have a video of dealing with this funny habit of all smoke bushes, and I will link that in the show notes for you, Joanne, so you can read and see how we recommend dealing with it.
Tammy writes to us, my elderly parents take great pride in their lawn care. They're currently using a service to try and control weeds and dandelions. It's become a cost burden to them. Is there something out there, tried and true, that you can recommend for weed control that won't harm the grass? And I say yes, a multitude of things. Number one, raise the deck on the lawnmower. You raise the deck on the lawnmower to the top height, you will naturally control weeds in your yard. Also be out there in the fall, feeding it and taking care of weeds. Fall is the best time of the year for control, and you're going to find come spring you'll have far less weeds if you pay attention to it in fall. And then, Stacy, I'm a big proponent for corn gluten on the lawn. I think it makes for a great fertilizer and also is a great weed preventative. It doesn't kill weeds, but it keeps weed seed from germinating.
Right, and that will go out down in the spring. The corn gluten meal would go down in the spring. I think the key, those are all great advice. You can also use a pre-emergent herbicide to prevent seeds from germinating, but of course then you need to know if you're dealing with perennial weeds or annual weeds. So it does take a little bit of research to figure this out and plan what you can do, but it's absolutely within the realm of do it yourself. The other thing I would recommend is keep that lawn growing vigorously. And it sounds like it's a point of pride for them. Fertilize it, water it. And the more thick and dense and vigorous your lawn is, the better it can outcompete any weeds that attempt to grow in that beautiful, lush carpet.
Agree, and raise that deck.
And raise the deck. So some easy things that you can do to hopefully keep the green lawn that they love and a little bit more green in their pockets. So thank you all so much for your questions. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to have a conversation with Brie Arthur about gardening in the South. So please stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show. It's time for branching news, and on today's show, as we mentioned in the first segment, an interview with Brie Arthur. Now, many of you know of her as Brie the Plant Lady. Make sure to check out her YouTube channel, social media, and also go to briegrows.com. She is an author and just a wonderful personality who really promotes this thing we love called gardening. And of course, Brie, you used to live in Michigan, correct?
I did. I grew up in Monroe, also known as Funroe.
That's great.
Spent a lot of time at Michigan State as a 4-H'er.
That's great.
I owe it all to 4-H for introducing me to horticulture. And Michigan is just such a special place, just for agriculture, but specifically for ornamental horticulture. Mm-hmm. It's like really the state that leads the industry. It's really remarkable.
Well, let's give some pointers to our southern gardeners here. You moved from Michigan to the, just south of the Raleigh area, I believe, in North Carolina. Let's start with soil. What struck you as far as the soil is concerned, and what are your recommendations for southern gardeners?
Well, soil is the key to everything, and the biggest disadvantage that southern gardeners have is the fact that the ground doesn't freeze. And we get a lot of precipitation in the winter, and all of your good organic matter literally flows into the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, wow.
So the number one thing that, as a gardener in the South, that you have to sort of adjust psychologically to is the fact that you're never going to be finished with soil prep. Every single year, you need to add more organic matter, particularly those fallen leaves that that nature provides us. Instead of blowing them away or raking them or burning them, leave them in your beds. They are there for a reason. And in the South in particular, that is the fastest way to improve the ground that you grow in.
That's
I find that
point.
Leaves aren't quite enough. You probably are still going to have to bring in some off-site substrate, especially if you're living in a new subdivision where the builder has essentially scraped away anything that might have been quality soil that's now been sold as topsoil, and has left you with something that might be like the surface of Mars. And heavily compacted, doesn't absorb water, usually is hydrophobic, and it's a nightmare to try to dig in. And, the sooner that you can, include organic matter into that, and then my next recommendation for soil improvement is spending just a few dollars on some really easy cover crops, things like daikon radish, crimson clover, buckwheat. These are plants that have more traditional roots, literally, in agriculture, but work really quickly to improve hard pan clay, which is typically what people in the South are dealing with. And in one rotation with those cover crops, you'll see an incredible improvement in the porosity and, again, the retention of organic matter so that you can start to build beds and successfully grow plants.
That's well-grounded advice. What about the seasons? How do you take advantage of the seasons being different than what we experience here in the North? November, December, important months to be in the garden?
I would say you don't plant anything in any time before November. And it's so counterintuitive. We often don't have our first killing frost until Thanksgiving.
Wow.
And, just to give you a reference of how different the climate is. And you really don't want to be putting in particularly woody plants, trees and shrubs that are in larger size pots, 3-gallon, 5-gallon, 7-gallon and larger. You don't want to install those in the ground anytime before we've started having regular frost. And so we always say, fall and winter are for planting. Summer is just for barely getting by. And it's the truth, because if you get your shrubs and trees planted in late autumn, early winter, they're much easier to get established. You're still going to have to give supplemental water through the spring and summer during that first year, but far less than if you were to wait until, April or May or, God forbid, June. Really, don't ever plant anything larger than a 1-gallon in the South after May.
Now, Brie, just so our listeners have context, you are in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina, right?
I am.
Okay, and what USG hardiness zone are you considered now?
So with the recent change, we have now graduated to Zone 8.
Okay.
I don't trust it. I think, like a lot of people are saying now, the zone map that the East Coast uses in contrast to the sunset map out west doesn't really take into account all of the climatic information that we probably need to be thinking about. Average cold temperature is one set of data, but, it doesn't mean that we now can just, without hesitation, plant things that were always that are from the Zone 8, because establishment is so complicated. We all have that holiday freeze from 2 years ago that really wiped out a huge portion of the South with, tons of broadleaf evergreens that have been in the ground 30 years and died to the ground or died altogether. And we're all very sensitive now to the temperature fluctuations that the South is experiencing. And so I worry now with the zone map that it doesn't take into consideration enough information, and especially for people in the North who are pretty used to knowing, like, Zone 5 that's sort of what our entire gardening perspective is based off of. Like, all of the information on plant tags kind of revolves around Zone 5. I grew up in the Zone 5 mafia. And it's quite accurate.
Oh, that's great.
You know, here in the South, I think the bigger challenge with figuring out plant establishment is just how unpredictable the weather patterns can be through the winter season. You know, we can be 70 degrees and then suddenly go to 15 degrees within 8 hours. And the plants aren't hardened off, and that's really what causes so much damage. So I'd say gardening is not for the faint of heart. When you move to the South, you actually have to develop thicker skin.
You know, Brie, I've always told people there are three types of people in the world: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what in the world just happened. And that's what we're dealing with as far as these weather patterns are concerned. It sounds like you have to be as creative in the South as we have to be in the North. As a matter of fact, Stacy, I watched with interest Brie in 100-degree weather, picking up one of her favorite things, cattle fence panels from Tractor Supply, and using them in her landscape, not only for deer control, but also to create these really neat arches to grow your plants on.
I'm addicted to galvanized steel.
I knew it.
It doesn't rust. And the termites don't eat it. You know, I always tell people, like, if you want to start with raised bed gardening, like, maybe buy a feed tank, a galvanized feed tank from Tractor Supply. It won't disappear in 2 years' time from those horrible termites that are everywhere that you look. And I have realized that I have a real affinity for things that I don't have to replace with regularity.
I hope Tractor Supply is paying you royalties for these commercials.
You know, they aren't, but I have to say, I do appreciate that they're located everywhere, so it's advice that everyone can take.
For our southern gardeners, down south, I see castor bean plants growing as big as your house. I see eggplant, taller than I am. Amazing. Do you have to become a good pruner or make sure that you understand good pruning practices if you're living in the South?
I would say yes and no. With regard to vegetables, we have a rule here. Tomato cages are for peppers and eggplants, and tomatoes need cattle fence panels because they grow so much bigger, often 15, 20 foot tall. You know, we have an April to November frost-free season, and these vegetables grow that whole time. And then with pruning, you know, particularly with shrubs, it's really important to look and get information from local experts or local garden centers, because you can't in the South always trust the information that's on that plant tag.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we do plant tags, and they're supposed to go all over the country. So we do very much rely on local garden centers to provide that specific information and that specific local insight. And that's the value really of shopping locally, is it's not just that the plants probably didn't go as far and all of that, but like that local advice becomes more and more important the less confident you are gardening there.
That is exactly true. And you'll better be able to understand where you should put the plant, so then you don't have to do excessive amounts of pruning. Just let's face it, watching something bloom and grow is more enjoyable than cutting it down.
Yeah, for sure.
For our listeners, we've got just a couple moments left here. Brie, can you share a few plants that maybe struck you as being great plants to use if you're in the South, particularly if you're somebody who used to garden in the North, now you've moved to the South? What are three really good winners you should make sure to have in your landscape?
Oh, I love this question so much. Okay, without hesitation, if you are addicted to lilac, you have to grow Osmanthus fragrans. Honestly, it's the plant that can justify the heat. When Osmanthus fragrans starts to bloom, which it's just starting to right now, your whole life and perspective will change. Mm-hmm. It is truly the most magnificent plant. And then, of course, because I'm a camellia lady, and I did not grow up with camellias, I was introduced to them upon moving to the South. there are over 25,000 registered Camellia japonica, over 300 species of camellias. You live in a warm climate. Camellias are your best option for residential screening that you will also get fabulous flowers from all winter long. And then one other absolute favorite, beam of sunshine, ultra fragrant, wonderful plant that brings you joy in January, Edgeworthia chrysantha. And truly, these are 3 taxa that justify what we live through in the summer, because when these plants bloom in the winter, you forget about how hot July and August are.
Well, those are definitely 3 plants that I personally would love to grow, despite the fact that I've been a lifelong northern gardener. Camellias are something that I could just go bananas for. I could just fill my entire yard with them. I'm crazy about them.
Beautiful.
So I am glad to hear that you are taking full advantage of the opportunities in North Carolina to, and osmanthus. Oh my gosh, just love it.
Well, you can follow Brie's gardening journey through her website, briegrows.com. So that's BRIE grows.com, or her social media, her YouTube channel, Brie the Plant Lady. Brie, always a joy and a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for everything you do for the gardening industry that we love, and all the encouragement you give to people. And thanks for joining us on the Gardening Simplified show.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Brie. Well, that was enlightening and inspiring. I don't think I'm going to be moving to the South anytime soon, but if I do, it's good to know what I need to know to make sure that I'm as successful and gardening is as enjoyable as it is here. So thank you so much to Brie for your time and all that great insight. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Adriana. And as always, thanks to all of you for listening. Hope you have a wonderful week ahead.